All right, good afternoon, and welcome to the panel session on translating GeroScience into clinic. My name is David Lee. I'm an associate professor at USC in the School of Gerontology and the School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences, and I'll be the moderator today for this panel. So I think we have aging experts in the room, but also those who are exploring the field of aging. So I think I'll start with defining what GeroScience is. So GeroScience is basically based on the fact that aging is the major risk factor for multiple chronic diseases, if not all of them. And so if we target aging, we'll be able to postpone or maybe even prevent the onset of many of these debilitating conditions. And this concept arose from a wealth of data that has accumulated over 50 years plus in the field of aging, especially in the molecular mechanisms of aging, which has led to several interventions that can indeed extend the lifespan and health span of model organisms, including mice. But if anybody's tried to do it in humans, you will soon know that it's really difficult. There are many, many hurdles that we have to overcome. So what I wanted to do today with this exceptional panel here is to touch upon some of what I call the elephants in the room questions, and to pick their brains and really start a conversation that can go beyond this panel. So with that, could we have a round of introductions, starting with your affiliation and some background, please? Maybe Bill?
Hi, I'm Bill Lowry. I've been a professor here for 19 years in the Department of Molecular Cell and Developmental Biology. I'm also a member of the Molecular Biology Institute, the Johnson Cancer Center, and the Broad Center for Regenerative Medicine.
Hi, and my name is Denis Evseenko, and I'm a vice chair of orthopedic research at USC Keck School of Medicine. I'm also starting a new initiative at USC. It was announced this week. It's a new longevity accelerator funded by a generous gift, $10 million gift from Perry's family. And the goal of this initiative is to bridge multiple schools that we have and bring a lot more aging research to Keck School of Medicine, and also connect us better with the excellent School of Gerontology that we have at USC and other critical players in the space. So I'm also a co-founder of two aging companies, and one of them is a clinical stage company with a chemical drug developed for osteoarthritis. It's undergoing clinical trials now, and it's a knee injection. So I learned this field from multiple angles. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting.
Hello, my name is Erin Overstreet, and I'm the head of the USC Technology Transfer Office, the Stevens Center for Innovation. And I'm basically in charge of helping innovations that are developed at the university leave the lab and hopefully become therapeutics in the space of aging.
All right, thank you. So we have very limited time, so I'm going to jump right into the topics. The first one, which is the first elephant, which is regulatory approval, also known as indication dilemma. So as many of you know, FDA does not recognize aging as an indication. And this is a big problem for those who are trying to develop interventions against aging. So here is a strategic question for biotech. Do you play the Trojan horse playbook and start with a chronic disease that has an approved indication, put one foot into the FDA paradigm, and then add on more indications to the same drug as you go forth? Or would you come up with a more creative business plan that can allow you to target aging as a primary indication, not indication, primary target head on from the get-go? So maybe...
Yeah, I can
Denis?
start. So I think this is a very important question, David, but I think what is really needed is to define things better. Because at the moment, we're talking about multiple things at once, and I see at least 4 different categories of aging-related interventions that we need to talk about and maybe define them differently. So first is age-related diseases that are not really dangerous, not life-threatening, but they're very debilitating. They can affect health span a lot. So like macular degeneration and aging, osteoarthritis, they're not life-threatening, but they're really bad diseases. And I think that those ones can be treated and drugs can be developed using typical FDA path. So the second category is diseases of aging that are life-threatening and that can actually affect your lifespan. So cancer, cardiovascular diseases, so on and so forth. It can be acute diseases like COVID, right? That killed people, relatively healthy people, aged people. So it can be also defined as an aging disease. And in this case, I think it can be done through the FDA, and I don't think there's any issues, right? Lifespan extending claims may be difficult, but in this case, it's not really maximal lifespan extension to the maximum that a human being humans as species can reach and achieve. I think those interventions are more targeting lifespan extension to an average level that, it's not terminated early enough. And then the third category will be what you defined as specific aging interventions to slow down aging. I think that's where the problem begins. And that's where we probably will not be able to do much in the next, decade or two, because the only, I think, outcome that will be accepted by the FDA is a significant lifespan extension as an outcome, which is very difficult to show in humans. So in a fourth category, I'll be very brief. It's basically this radical lifespan extension to people to live for 200-300 years, and there's some companies doing that. I don't think we need to comment on that yet, but I think it's happening too.
Right. Anybody to add?
A couple things, I guess. And one is that if you were going to shoot for health span or lifespan, even if you came up with the perfect therapy, it's hard to imagine being able to run that trial, because how long does that trial need to last? How much financial runway do you have to run that trial to get on average a few more years of health? You got to run it for 10 years, and so you're going to go out of business. So even if you have the perfect thing, I don't know how you do it. The other issue for me, maybe it gets to the next, is the biomarkers, and that how do you define the aging or even the health span? It always frustrated me in the aging field that we use this marker of beta-galactosidase activity in the lysosome, and nobody knows why we actually use this marker. Or what does it mean? Has anyone ever turned it on or off and asked about how aging is affected? Or the epigenetic clock, same thing. We have the clock, but we have no idea how the hell it works or why. And so I think going after it globally faces all these huge hurdles. So to me, it's super intimidating unless you've raised $3 billion, which some have. And so to me, the only way to do it is to just go after the disease that affects old folks and try to treat that. And we get enough of them together. I mean, right now, all kinds of trials are running that are anti-aging, and that we're treating heart disease and liver disease and this, then the things that afflict old folks. So we're doing aging research right now. We're just doing it piecemeal. Right. And maybe that's the only practical way of doing it, because you can't run a 30-year clinical trial to see if you've extended lifespan for 5 years.
So the Trojan horse approach will be the first more practical way.
I think so.
Even the companies that have $3 billion, they are resorting to that strategy too. But it's not the first time that we have preventative medicines for chronic diseases of aging. The conditions we mentioned, heart disease, we have statins, ACE inhibitors. Vaccines are by nature preventative before the disease comes. And we have repurposed drugs like aspirin, or even more recently, GLP-1 receptor agonists, which are more preventative in a way. So the question, I guess, comes back down to how do we overcome this regulatory component? And learning from things like trials like metformin, like you said, it's very expensive to run these clinical trials, 15 years, 30 years, $80 million plus. And so it's not a reproducible or a scalable thing for industry, right? So it comes down to, I think, the next topic, like you said, biomarkers. We need some proxies for aging. And there's a lot of discussion about this and a lot of efforts to bring that forth. So here's the question then. How would you define or even come up with a framework for criteria for a reliable biomarker of aging? What would that mean to you? Bill.
It's a great question. I don't have a great answer, partly because everybody ages differently based on your genetic background, your lifestyle, your environment, your socioeconomic status. I mean, so much goes into it that it seems difficult to suggest that there's going to be any one biomarker that works across a wide population, but perhaps we could come up with an index of biomarkers that together, define aging. Maybe the epigenetic clock isn't enough, the senescence stain isn't enough, but you get enough of these together, and maybe then you can overcome the issue of genetic background in different environments, etc.
I like that idea, composite endpoints. I think that's a defining difference between these currently used preventative drugs versus the GeroScience drugs, is that the current ones have a clear specific endpoint, whereas the aging ones will have a composite of them. So that's going to be very difficult. So what kinds of biomarkers would you think? Would this be molecular or physical tests, genetic tests?
No, what are you thinking for your trial? So you're starting a trial. What are the biomarkers for that?
Well, there's no FDA accepted biomarker for osteoarthritis clinically, and we don't think there will be one developed soon. I'm afraid I'm positive about biomarkers, but unfortunately, biomarkers are predicting. They predict outcomes, right? They're predictors of an outcome.
The process, yeah.
Yes, and that's why statins, were approved, because you can have potentially some conditions like high cholesterol, other things that predict that this person have high risk of, stroke or myocardial infarction. So that's why the FDA look at it as a logical story. But if you talk about biomarkers of aging, so they must predict something, like to tell you that something is going wrong. So they predict an outcome. And in this case, aging is an outcome, right? So you can only link them to chronological age. And a lot of people did that, right? So they can show that, okay, this person is biologically older than this person. But so what does it mean for the FDA? I think it will run into exactly the same problem as interventions directed only towards aging. So I think they still need to be developed towards specific age-related diseases, unfortunately. That's how I heard.
Can I bring up an elephant in the room that I see? It seems like, there's so much work still to be done on aging, right? We don't understand the mechanisms of how people age across different populations. And I think the root cause is that there's just no funding in this field, right? Most of the diseases are diseases of aging, but to study aging, I don't think there's any dedicated funding for that, really. Less than 1% of the NIH budget, I think I read somewhere. So that would be the elephant in the room that I see. So we need to really understand biologically what's happening before we can get to the point of defining biomarkers.
So, David, if I may, to flip it into the related topic, because you ask how do we address this problem, how we convince the FDA. And I think an alternative approach was just taken by the, Montana people. So if they voted for a very interesting initiative that may be very relevant to our discussion and business models in this field. Basically, for those of you who don't know, they just voted, and the governor already has signed that, a proposition where phase 2 and phase 3 will not be needed. So they will let clinical centers in Montana administer drugs for aging, for longevity as indication, as long as they have phase 1 clearance. So they were demonstrated to be safe. So FDA is only present until the phase 1, and then they basically waive any need for this complicated efficacy trials. So maybe if those policies are adopted, by multiple places, and then a lot more data will come in with all these trials, that eventually it will generate some statistics, and eventually the FDA will allow claims related to aging or lifespan extension. I think it's a viable way. It's a lot more viable than convincing the FDA to change their policies.
The problem is I can't imagine people are going to actually run trials. They're just going to open a shop and sell drugs. And so there won't be any tracking. There won't be any outcomes. For the FDA, one thing to consider is, at least the way I understand it, the FDA doesn't really tell you what they'll allow versus not allow. You need to submit an IND. You need to submit a protocol and see if it gets approved. And so maybe it's a matter of educating the FDA. It's a matter of people trying and failing over and over, an iterative process before we find out what the FDA will allow, because we don't actually know, because no one's ever apply for a trial for lifespan extension or
Right.
anti-aging therapy.
Right. And that'll need a lot of funding, as Erin was saying. So the question is, where do we get that from? But did you have something?
Oh, I was just going to say, it sounds like what's going to happen in Montana is actually going to harm the industry more than it's going to do good.
Yeah. It sounds like the FDA is malleable, as it always has been. For example, when HPV vaccines first came out, I think many people didn't believe there could be a preemptive, preventative a therapy or intervention for cancer. And that took a lot of clinical trials as well, but also a very strong advocacy group that really pushed the policies forward. And the pandemic as well, there was emergency use of these vaccines. And I started to think, things like Alzheimer's, it is almost like a tsunami that's going to hit us soon. And it's at some point, it might be like a emergency situation. So do you think we just wait for that to happen and then FDA to follow on like the pandemic did? Or do you think there should be like the HPV situation where the Asian community, the academia industry and the investment sector all come together to really have a strong advocacy approach to this? Meaning, do we accelerate it or do we just wait until the government follows suit?
I mean, it could be a challenge in that there's no advocacy group. We're all getting older. So there's no sort of sympathy for this group versus that group. We're showing the direct need for this group or that group. Everyone is getting older. Everyone's going to die. Everyone's going to die of an age-related disease. And so I think it's a challenge to say, oh, we're all just going to do it, because if everybody does it, then there's no contrast. There's no priorities. And so just hard to imagine how it doesn't happen piecemeal, the Trojan horse approach. And then it's a matter of finding therapies that play well together, right? So if you have a treatment for 3 different organs or systems or diseases, can you actually take all 3 of those together and actually get benefit if they're not at odds or whatever? Or, one approach is something that works. We're right now working on a regenerative approach that works in hair follicles, and our approach is to say, okay, it works in hair follicles. Where else does it work? So we treat whole animals and ask which tissues get better. And so we see maybe an effect here and there, and it sort of build up that way. So start specific and see what other tissues it might work in. But it takes a long time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of markers for each of those tissues and all the kinds of hurdles we have here. But to me, that's a better approach than just saying, I'm going to reverse all aging. It seems impossible. Sorry.
I think that's sort of the problem. It does seem impossible. So maybe that's why there's not as much funding for it right now. So breaking it down might help some.
Yeah, I think I'll be a little bit more optimistic here, because I think if you watch what ARPA-H, for example, is trying to do now, introducing this health score, so the integrated parameter that integrates some molecular things like, aging clock with common outcome measures, right? So they want to build a score, the health span score, and I think it's probably the way they're doing it now is a little bit premature, is not going to go far. But the idea is brilliant, because what the FDA may buy is the idea that if you have a drug that helps a person with, and this is the approach we are trying to take, because most aging diseases are multimorbidity conditions, right? So it's basically a syndrome where you have, if you have osteoarthritis, you have a lot more chances to have Alzheimer's disease. It's very well demonstrated. If you have liver problems, NASH or other conditions, it will actually correlate with osteoarthritis and so on and so forth. So if you can show the FDA that, your therapy is affecting multiple conditions, then you can say, well, it's probably affecting a general underlying cause for all of these diseases, because the way they think is so specialty specific. And that's how our medicine operates. It's very specialty specific. However, and there are some conditions like metabolism, right, that affect multiple things. Chronic inflammation, if you show that it's targeting multiple organs and improving health in these organs, I think they may accept it as an argument that it may be not enough to claim for drug that you administer for osteoarthritis, that it's improving health span and longevity. But if you are hitting multiple conditions at once, they may accept it as an argument for an anti-aging therapy.
Yeah, this is great. So, there's a lot of sentiment in that too. You go for a chronic disease first, and then you add on, like Bill was saying. It sounds like a good strategy from a practical perspective, but in the end, you're dealing with a giant here, and it's not going to be possible. So compressing morbidity towards the very tail end of life, which is my dream of, if I get cancer, I want to get it a week before I die, is kind of the way to go, which is what GeroScience represents. It's not just one disease at a time. If we can push the aging process back, and that sounds elusive right now, but if you take things like exercise and diet, those are things that pretty much every department in the hospital will advocate for, meaning there is a common thread here where we're somehow, without putting a finger on anything, pushing something back. So, the first thing people say is, well, you got to eat well, sleep well, and exercise, and that'll help you a lot. So that's kind of what GeroScience is about, which is get into the core of all of this. So it's a pioneering field, and I think any pioneering field would have this in the journey of that field. It'll have that activation energy that's very high, and we're trying to figure out how we can overcome this. But the biomarkers, going back to the biomarkers, I like the idea that you guys threw in there. But even if we have some biomarkers that are proxies for biological aging, and there could be many of them, the other hurdle is, how do you put it all together so it gains global acceptance in multiple fields, scientific, clinical, and regulatory communities? How do you think that's going to happen? But not only in the U.S., it'll probably have to happen across the world, because these interventions cannot just be applicable to a group of people. It has to be beyond race and sex.
Wow, that's tough. I mean, usually the way these things work is the people who fund the work are basing it on a few people that can afford the therapy, and then it works for those folks, and then you develop cheaper ways of doing it. And I would imagine that's the way this would work as well. Jeff Bezos will get younger faster than the rest of us, and then it'll be whatever the new CEO is, right?
He'll go to space and get younger.
Yeah, exactly.
Relativity.
How do you societally spread this to a wider population? That's social, economic, that's political, and maybe it also has to do with, we should talk about tech transfer, that what are the terms under which whatever you invent, whatever therapy, how much does that get locked up with a single entity who then hoards that for their own financial benefit? That's going to determine how widely it spreads. I don't know if you want to.
I can jump in. So, I think it's great. This field of geroscience these kinds of things always start at universities, and our office is there to support the innovations that come out of these kinds of endeavors. And so the first thing that I would say is, if an innovator approached our office with a new therapeutic for aging, is I would try to help them with really solid IP, which, would have some fallback positions in case the aging path doesn't work out. We would try to figure out if there's a way to protect maybe other indications and diseases. And then we would have a plan for getting the technology out of the university with reasonable licensing terms. I think the issue that we might face, or that you guys might want to talk about, is, is there VC funding for startups in this field? And how can we kind of attract more venture capital? And I think that starts with really getting great mechanism of action data, very robust across the best models that you can find in this field, trying to prove out the concept as well as you can in the lab, and having a way through the clinic, because the VCs are really going to want to see that there's a path to getting this into humans and to seeing some therapeutic effect. Even if it's not aging, this still may work, and we can expand later. This is the path for now.
And this is a great segue to move on to the next topic, with this tech transfer. But just going back to what Bill was saying, the rich people will probably benefit first, and then the technology will trickle down. But I'm leaving for Korea after this to take USC students to understand aging in South Korea, which many of you might have seen the publication from the Lancet, that will be the longest lived country in about 5 years, with a life expectancy of a girl born today to be about 90. That means right now, many countries, including South Korea, are super agers. 20% of the population or more are over age of 65. So it's a scenario where it's not okay if you're fine, if your neighbors are not fine, then everybody's not fine kind of situation. It's not a one or two, 3 people out there. We're talking a fifth of the population reaching that age. And if they're lucky, they'll have one problem, one disease, but most will have 2 or 3 comorbidities. So GeroScience research, I think, is really important. But going back to what Erin was saying with funding being a big question, which venture capital will come in? There's a lot of hesitancy there. But looking at what Denis was going through this week, maybe there are donors out there who also recognize this social problem. Maybe the universities and biotech as well should venture out into that realm a little bit more, be more proactive in searching for people. If there's money out there, there's money in LA, there's money, here and there. Maybe the efforts from us should be more geared towards different pockets of money. What do you thoughts on that?
The problem is if you propose to take a sober long-term view approach, and that you're going to carefully figure out the biomarkers and a therapy that really works to improve health span, and it's going to take 10 years. Most of the money is not interested in that. I mean, this has been kind of a scammy field since the fountain of youth for thousands of years, right? So that's going to be a challenge to overcome just that sentiment that it's a race for cash, and whoever's making the most outlandish statements about how their therapy works is going to get the most money to fund their work, regardless of how sound the science is. So the two things are at odds. Yeah.
We don't have time to discuss that, but that's another big problem with social media being such a broad-reaching media these days. There is disinformation and misinformation that confuses people, and then people lose interest in that. I think we're almost running out of time. And with Denis.
Yeah, I just want to add a positive statement here that don't forget that we are living in the era of artificial intelligence. And, one thing that I have a lot of hope for is that this new technology will allow us to see things that we didn't see before. Because we are technically still using in clinic diagnostic tools that were invented, 50 years ago, clinical biochemistry, cytology, things like that. So all this unique technology we have in the labs, all these mass spec machines, other, unique immunology tools, other things, they're not really used to address all these questions. And I think what may help us if we bring a lot of this technology to GeroScience, generate a lot of data, and work close with artificial intelligence guys to create some algorithms to integrate these big data sets into something like a vitality health span, index that we can actually talk, with FDA about and convince them that this is the best, the best state of the art that we have today. So maybe.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Denis said, and I would add also that I'm being, so negative because of all the challenges, but every once in a while something comes along and shocks us all, right? For me, it was Shinya Yamanaka reprogramming a fibroblast into a pluripotent. We all said it couldn't be done. And so there is something out there percolating in some lab that is going to change the way we think about GeroScience and aging and reversing aging, and we just haven't heard about it yet. Something's coming. We don't. If we knew, we'd be doing it.
Absolutely.
I'll just add that I think we're in that era. You guys have already done it. You're chipping away at pieces of aging. You address baldness, right? And you address arthritis. So we're doing it. And thank you. Almost there.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. You can go to the moon these days, but you can't make a hair grow back. So. This is very exciting, but we're really out of time. Maybe take one question from the audience, if anybody has something to add. Okay. Well, I think this is really exciting, and there's many, many more elephants in the room, so to speak, to discuss. but there is enthusiasm for GeroScience and to keep going forward and not be deterred with all these hoops that we have to go through. And like Bill said, maybe one of us might stumble upon something and that'll revolutionize the whole field. So with that, I think we'll wrap up today. Please stick around and grab the panelists or meet people who are interested in this too. And hopefully this sparks some conversations that can carry into the hallway and forth. So thank you very much.